Here's something nobody tells you. You can be running on a full night's sleep, eating well, exercising, doing everything right, and your brain can still be quietly shrinking. Not metaphorically, physically, measurably. Scientists have been watching this happen in real time using MRI scans, and what they found is, frankly, disturbing, because the cause isn't a disease. It's not a genetic condition. It's something almost every single person watching this has experienced, probably right now, in some form. Stress. Not the dramatic, crisis-level kind, the ordinary kind, the low-grade, background hum of modern life, deadlines, finances, relationships, screens, noise, that kind. And here's what nobody explains. Your brain doesn't know the difference between a threat that's going to kill you and a problem that's just stressing you out. It responds the same way, every time. The question is what happens when that response never fully switches off. Stay with me, because the answer changes how you think about almost everything. To understand what long-term stress actually does to your mind, you need to understand what stress was designed to do. Your brain has a threat detection system built in, ancient, fast, and very, very good at its job. The moment you perceive danger, a region deep in your brain called the hypothalamus fires off a chemical signal. Within seconds, your adrenal glands are activated, cortisol and adrenaline pour into your bloodstream, your heart rate climbs, your muscles tense, your digestion slows, and your attention narrows to a razor point. This is the fight or flight response. And in short bursts, it's actually brilliant. It sharpens reflexes. It enhances focus. Moderate cortisol even gives memory encoding a temporary boost, which is why emotionally intense moments tend to be so vivid in your mind. That part is well documented. The problem isn't the alarm. The problem is the alarm that never stops. When stress becomes chronic, when the pressure is relentless, when the threat feels inescapable, the system stays switched on. Cortisol keeps circulating, and that's when things start to go wrong in ways that are invisible from the outside, but show up clearly on a brain scan. Here's the first thing that happens, and it's the one that surprised researchers the most. Your brain starts to physically change shape. The hippocampus, the seahorse-shaped region buried in your temporal lobe that handles memory, spatial navigation, and learning, is packed with cortisol receptors more densely than almost any other region in the brain. And under sustained cortisol exposure, it begins to atrophy. Neuroimaging studies have found that people exposed to prolonged work-related stress show measurably smaller hippocampal volumes than their less stressed counterparts, a finding published in Biological Psychiatry that has since been replicated across multiple populations. A large study published in Neurology found that high cortisol levels in adults correlated with reduced total brain volume and lower frontal and occipital gray matter, regions tied to memory, learning, and executive function. And at the cellular level, research has consistently shown that sustained glucocorticoid exposure causes dendrites, the branching connection points between neurons, to retract and shrink. This happens not over decades, but over weeks. Think about that, not years, weeks. But here's the part that makes it stranger still. The hippocampus isn't just shrinking. It's also slowing the production of new neurons. In a healthy brain, the hippocampus is one of the only regions in the adult brain where neurogenesis, the birth of new brain cells, actually occurs. Research has consistently shown that chronic stress significantly suppresses this process. And when new neurons stop arriving at the rate they should, the brain's ability to form new memories, adapt to new information, and regulate emotional responses starts to deteriorate. You don't feel it as shrinkage, you feel it as fog, so the hippocampus is shrinking. What else? Meet the prefrontal cortex. It's the region sitting just behind your forehead, and it is, in every sense, what makes you you. It's responsible for planning, reasoning, impulse control, decision-making, and regulating your emotional reactions. It's the part of your brain that says wait before you send the angry message. That weighs consequences before acting. That keeps your inner life from spilling out unchecked. Under chronic stress, the prefrontal cortex also begins to structurally remodel, and not in a good way. Extended exposure to stress hormones causes the dendrites of neurons in this region to retract. Multiple peer-reviewed studies, including research published in cerebral cortex and replicated across both animal and human models, have confirmed this structural remodeling in the medial prefrontal cortex after sustained stress exposure. The connections that allow complex, nuanced thinking to happen become physically less robust. What that translates to in real life is harder to capture in a single measurement, but the pattern is consistent. Impaired executive function, difficulty prioritizing, reduced emotional regulation. These aren't just subjective complaints. They map onto structural changes that show up on scans. Now notice what's happening here. The part of your brain designed to regulate your emotional responses is getting weaker. Meanwhile, something else is getting stronger. The amygdala. The amygdala is your brain's alarm bell, the region responsible for detecting threats and generating fear. It processes danger before your conscious mind even knows something is happening. And while the prefrontal cortex pulls back under chronic stress, research in animal models shows the amygdala trending in the opposite direction. It grows more reactive, more sensitive, more trigger-happy. Chronic stress has been shown to increase dendritic growth in the amygdala, making it structurally more elaborate and active, even as the prefrontal cortex quietly atrophies. Think about what that combination actually feels like in daily life. A weakened prefrontal cortex struggling to regulate emotion, and an overactive amygdala flooding you with alarm signals. Suddenly, the irritability, the anxiety, the difficulty concentrating, the sense of being perpetually on edge, that's not a character flaw. If the research is right, that's your brain's architecture being physically reshaped from the inside out. And here's where it gets even more interesting, because so far, we've only talked about structure. The chemistry is a whole other story. Cortisol doesn't just physically remodel neurons. It gets into the chemical signaling systems of the brain and starts turning dials. One of the first things it disrupts is dopamine. Dopamine is often described as the pleasure chemical, but that's a simplification. It's really the molecule of anticipation. It drives motivation, the desire to pursue goals, the feeling that things are worth doing. And chronic stress disrupts the dopamine pathways in the brain's reward circuitry. The result is a state researchers call anhedonia, the progressive loss of pleasure in things that used to feel meaningful. Hobbies stop feeling interesting. Social events feel like obligations. The signals that used to say this is worthwhile go quiet. Scientists at the Medical College of Georgia found that in animal models, neurons in the hypothalamus become hyperactive under chronic, unpredictable stress. And when they do, this anhedonia-like behavioral state reliably follows. The brain's reward system isn't choosing indifference. It's being driven there. Serotonin gets caught in the crossfire too. Research on the relationship between stress, the HPA axis, and serotonergic signaling, including work published in peer-reviewed aging and neuroscience literature, points to stress-related disruption of serotonin function. Serotonin is closely tied to mood stability, social behavior, and emotional resilience. It's worth noting the precise mechanisms here are still being studied. What we can say with confidence is that the pattern of cortisol degrading emotional regulation runs deep across multiple neurochemical systems simultaneously. There's also the matter of the immune system, and this one surprised even researchers. A 2024 study from the University of Zurich found that under chronic stress, an enzyme from immune cells actually crosses into the brain, triggering withdrawal behavior and social avoidance in animal models. The implication, though how this translates to humans is still being investigated, is that stress may not be just a brain problem. It could be a whole body problem that loops back into the brain through immune pathways that no one was looking for. The brain is not a sealed unit. It's in constant conversation with your blood, your gut, your hormones. And chronic stress appears to disrupt that conversation at multiple levels simultaneously. Here's the part most people don't hear about. Because this is where stress stops being a productivity problem and starts becoming something with much longer consequences. A growing body of research, including a significant 2024 review in Trends in Neurosciences, has found that chronic stress and prolonged glucocorticoid elevation appear to promote the kinds of cellular processes that underlie Alzheimer's disease. Specifically, research has shown that chronic stress can increase tau phosphorylation, impair the clearance of amyloid beta proteins, and activate neuroinflammation. These are not minor footnotes. Tau tangles and amyloid plaques are the core structural signatures of Alzheimer's. The researchers are careful to note this is an area of active investigation. The causal chain is still being mapped, and correlation is not the same as cause. But the overlap is significant enough that it's being taken seriously at the highest levels of neuroscience research. There's also a related concept worth understanding: what researchers studying recurrent depression and mood disorders have called stress sensitization. Drawing on work going back to psychiatrist Robert Post in the 1990s, the idea is that repeated stress episodes may lower the threshold for future stress responses. The pattern, observed across studies of depression recurrence, suggests the brain can become more reactive over time rather than less without intervention. Whether this applies uniformly to everyday chronic stress is still being investigated, but based on what we understand about how the HPA axis responds to repeated activation, the possibility that pushing through indefinitely might work against you at a neurological level is worth taking seriously. And yet, and this is the part that genuinely matters, the picture is not fixed. The brain is plastic. It can change. And the same neuroplasticity that allows stress to reshape, it gives it the capacity to recover. Aerobic exercise has been shown in peer-reviewed studies to stimulate the release of a protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which promotes neurogenesis and synaptic repair, particularly in the hippocampus. Based on what we know about how BDNF interacts with hippocampal tissue, the evidence points toward exercise helping counteract at least some of what chronic stress does to that region. Mindfulness meditation has been shown in multiple trials to reduce cortisol levels and is associated with increased gray matter density in regions tied to emotion regulation. Cognitive behavioral therapy restructures the thought patterns that feed the stress response at its source. Crucially, the structural remodeling caused by chronic stress, particularly in younger adults, appears to be at least partially reversible once stress is reduced. In animal models, dendritic retraction in the prefrontal cortex reverses after chronic stress ends. In middle-aged and older individuals, that reversal becomes less complete, which is, in itself, an argument for not waiting. So let's bring this back to where we started. Your brain is not abstract. It is a physical organ that responds to its environment, and a modern life built on relentless pressure, unending information, and no real recovery time is an environment it was never designed for. The fog, the irritability, the inability to concentrate, the loss of joy, these aren't signs of weakness. They're signs of a system under load for too long, without relief. The research makes two things clear. First, this is real. The damage is measurable. It shows up on scans, in cellular structure, in chemistry, in behavior. Long-term stress isn't just uncomfortable. It physically restructures the organ you use to think, feel, connect, and make decisions. Second, it is not permanent. The brain's capacity to recover, given time, support, and the right conditions, is one of the most remarkable things about it. BDNF rises with exercise. Cortisol drops with genuine rest. Given the right environment, neural architecture can reorganize. The brain wants to change. It always does. The question is what you're asking it to change toward. What you do with that information is up to you, but now, at least, you know what you're actually dealing with.